All right. Hi, everyone. I think we can begin now. Welcome, everyone, to the CircleCI 101 webinar. My name is Zan Markin, and today we'll be looking at what CircleCI is, and we'll see a little demo, and you'll be able to ask any questions. If you have any questions during this webinar, you should see the Q&A button on your Zoom interface. So please use that and ask away, and we'll be answering your questions towards the end. We're leaving quite a lot of time for questions, so yeah, we can cover quite a lot. Anyway, let's continue. As I said, my name is Zan Markin. I'm a developer advocate at CircleCI. I'm based in London, UK, and my great pleasure in life is to be able to enable and educate developers all around the world. Yeah, I've been doing setting up and also breaking CI/CD systems for the better part of the decade, and yeah, I've covered quite a lot of DevOpsy topics as well. Anyway, if you want to keep in touch with me, my Twitter handle is zmarkin. And yeah, if you want to email me, you can do so at zan@circleci.com. Anyway, let's proceed. Let's first look at what topics we'll be covering today. So we'll start with a very quick introduction to CircleCI, the company, and also the product. Moving on to an introduction to CI/CD. I know there is quite a lot of attendees, folks registered today, and there's been like a varied background. So I decided to kind of cover a little bit of an introduction to the CI/CD topic, because developers might know about it, but people like product managers, engineering managers, or other types of folks might not be that familiar with the topic. So I'm going to be covering motivations, principles behind it, and what's involved. We'll move on to a product demo where I'll showcase the CircleCI platform, and some of the features we'll showcase in the demo, and some of the features we can talk about later on. And yeah, as I said, towards the end, we'll have a Q&A session. And just to reiterate, please, if you have any questions, do ask away and Q&A using the Q&A feature. So yeah, CircleCI, the company, we've been around for almost 10 years, and we are spread all around the globe, growing quite rapidly as well. We have bases in US, obviously headquartered in San Francisco, Canada, Germany, UK, Ireland, and Japan, with a bunch of employees also scattered in other countries. And yeah, we're on a mission to help people build better software and do so faster, which is a quite valiant mission, if I must say. We're also, yeah, the world's largest shared CI/CD platform. We're a dedicated CI/CD platform, so that's what we specialize in. We have all of our engineers making sure that that works, and the developer experience is great. And it shows because we have a bunch of awesome customers to show for it. We're operating at a really amazing scale. So 1 million builds per day happen on our platform. That's any type of software, from mobile applications to Kubernetes clusters, to open source products being deployed and built on our platform each day. With that scale, we're able to also gather some really cool insights, which I might touch on later with our annual State of Software Delivery report, which we released recently. Anyway, moving on. Continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD. You might have heard the terms before. Essentially, what this means is we're tying the software developer or software delivery process together. If you think about the software, how software is made, and delivered to the end users. On one end, you have developer teams, individual developers who are collaborating on their version control repositories. They're committing code, they're reviewing code, they're adding features, removing features, adding dependencies, all sorts of things that you do on a VCS provider. On the other hand, you have code that's actually being built and deployed into production. So it's actually being used by actual users. That could be web applications, that could be APIs, combination of everything, or like even mobile applications, or pretty much any other type of software that you can imagine. And in between is this giant automatable process, which we help facilitate. So if you're thinking as this how software is created, a developer commits some changes to their repository, the remote repository, for example, hosted on GitHub. That then triggers an event into CircleCI, and our platform then runs a set of scripts to build, test, do all sorts of tests, actually, just not unit tests, integration tests, functional tests, smoke tests, you name it, any type of tests, and then offloads that to the teams on or tools on the right that actually run, monitor, and operate it. So that's kind of where we sit in this software delivery life cycle. And ideally, we help automate as much as possible from this creation side. So ideally, developers would only be responsible, or like humans would only really be heavily involved in building, writing code, and reviewing it, and then everything else would be automated. There are many reasons why this is great. Main one is because software is just way too complex for any single human. Like if you imagine like what's involved in a like a any company, right? You have front end, you have back end, you have microservices thrown in, you have mobile applications, you have tools that are internal to the company, and all of that needs to be used, all of that needs to work, and all of that needs to be developed and maintained. And it's very hard to hold all that knowledge yourself. So that's why our automation, the tools that help us automate, help a lot. Anyway, essentially, when you're looking at CircleCI, you have, or any CI/CD tool, to be honest, you have a set of principles that kind of these tools follow. For example, one is configuration as code. So if we know that all software is kind of built with these, or most software is built on some kind of version control software as committed through that in form of source code. And that's why we also are able to add our kind of CI/CD configuration files committed alongside your project, for example, in Git, which means that anyone who can contribute can also contribute to the project, can also contribute to the CI/CD setup, and can review it as well. So all of that complexity is essentially written or codified as readable and executable code, which is amazing. The language you use is YAML for configuring our pipelines. We'll show you that in a few minutes. YAML is kind of quite descriptive, and lets us extend it as well with some pretty cool features. For example, orbs are our shareable configuration snippets, and you can also inject parameters into YAML as well. And because everything lives inside of your source, inside of your kind of Git repository, it means that as long as that build has passed once, it is always reproducible, which is, to me, the best feature ever. So if a commit has passed on the CI/CD, then you can always count on that commit to be actually be always kind of executable in exactly the same way. Helping that is the fact that everything is executed in this safe and isolated execution environment. So if you're thinking about how you build software, if you're building it on your local machine, you have a bunch of setup that you just kind of build up through the weeks and months and years of developing that software. So it's really hard to reproduce it. And you might have heard like this developer joke saying, works on my machine. So with the CI/CD tool, that's not a problem because everything is executed in this clean, isolated environment. Every kind of job, we call them jobs, is executed in its own either Docker container or virtual machine that is stood up and broken down at the beginning and the end, respectively. So yeah, everything is super reproducible. It's also very secure because you don't have to store your credentials in the history in Git or on a developer machine. So we do so by using encrypted environment variables and something called contexts, which allows to share between credentials between different projects as well. And obviously, you can tie in to your already automated process also other automated tools for things like security, vulnerability scanning. And that's like a big topic, big business as well. If you follow the news today, Sneak, for example, one of our partners, announced that they have raised a gigantic Series E round for their vulnerability scanning tool. And yeah, this is just always going to grow just because of the need for security. And lastly, the software that is kind of set up on a CI/CD system is always deliverable. If something passes, as I said, if a commit passes, all of your checks, all of your deploy stages, you can always count on that commit to be deliverable. And again, if it's not, it's still a valuable signal that something is broken in your pipeline, it's broken in your setup, and that's like essentially a red alert for you to go in and fix that as soon as possible. Because you have these kind of always deliverable state of software, it means that you don't have to rely on shipping gigantic monolithic kind of updates to your applications anymore. You can instead ship small incremental changes, sometimes as small as a individual commit that gets built and deployed to the customer before you really kind of have to worry about deploying something that's so significant they could actually take down your entire application. And of course, that doesn't have to happen. You can always implement some manual review steps and processes if you need to kind of ensure that stuff is always kind of ready to is always kind of up to standards that you or your organization have put in place. Anyway, enough me talking about the principles. You're here to see a demo and some features. So let's look at that. CircleCI, the platform, is essentially got two main parts. First one is the configuration, stuff that I talk about that is actually code that's committed to your projects. And the second part is the graphical web interface, the dashboard that lets you observe what's happening, dig into your builds, see what's going on, and analyze anything. We'll be looking at both. So I hope you can all see this. If not, please do leave a comment and I will be able to make it bigger or smaller if need be. Anyway, let's say this is my repository for an application that I have. It's a Node application. It's got a package JSON. It's got an app.js. Very simple. It just says hi from CircleCI. And yeah, within that, I have this .circleci folder with a single file called config.yaml. And that's essentially part of my repository, part of that application. It's tied to that particular version. So if that changes, a new commit has to be made. So the whole application is essentially changed as well. In this file, I've got a few things. First one is orbs, then jobs, then workflows. Jobs are essentially your collection of executable steps and an environment that you want to execute those steps in. For example, in my case, I'm using this CircleCI Docker image for Node.js. It uses Node 15.4. I could use any other version. And yeah, by kind of using one of those kind of Docker images, I'm able to always rely on whatever's kind of installed on that image. So I want Node, so Node I get. And obviously a series of steps. They can be command line instructions. So npm run. They can be checkout step, for instance, comes from CircleCI. It's a specific thing that kind of lets us check out the code from the relevant commit. And this one, for example, is node install packages. That's what comes from this orb, which is, as I said, a series or a collection of reusable configuration. So that if you imagine node install packages is a lot easier than saying npm install and also do a bunch of caching and restoring of cache so that all the node modules don't have to be kind of recreated from scratch every single time. So yeah, these steps execute in order, and if any one of them terminates, then obviously if our tests fail, then the below things won't execute unless we tell it, give it a when argument, which basically tells, okay, we always want to store the test results, which is another feature of CircleCI that I'll show you. And yeah, you can have a number of jobs in here, a number of which each has a number of steps. And last ones are workflows, which are essentially our way to orchestrate our jobs in an order. So for example, do this, run this job, and they will essentially run in parallel because we haven't specified they need to kind of wait for something. Whereas this one, hold for approval, actually requires these first two jobs to pass before we're kind of going to another. So yeah, that's kind of this configuration part and the dashboard. The whole configuration file, as it's executed, as it's triggered in a project, is called a pipeline. Yeah, and it will run one or many workflows. And yeah, each workflow can have jobs which are run in a number of times, one or many times, essentially. That's just to reiterate what I did. How to set this up? Obviously, you have to log in first. And to log in, I can go to circleci.com. And if I weren't logged in, I would have to log in. You log in with your VCS provider. In my case, that's GitHub. And if you've got a brand new project, then if you've got a brand new account without any project, then you're kind of taken to this projects tab. Maybe make this a little bit bigger as well. So yeah, this is linked to my GitHub, to my GitHub account. And yeah, this CircleCI 101 is exactly that project. So let's hit setup project, which will let us kind of use this on CircleCI. Okay, and it's kind of figured out, okay, I've already got the config.yaml. If I didn't have that, it would actually suggest us config.yaml based on what it's kind of figured out the language is. So in our case, because it detects a package.json, it would probably just infer that it's a Node project. So yeah, this is our config. And I can just hit start building. Let's see what happens. Okay, so this is now run our first pipeline. Each individual pipeline, so config run has an ID, so that's pipeline 1, and it's running this particular workflow. And you can always kind of, as I said, you can always go to the commit that is responsible for this. And this is our kind of visual representation of what's happening in this workflow. So you can see our vulnerability scan and build and test jobs are executed in parallel. And then they're followed by this hold for approval job, which requires them to pass first. So if, for example, I had a failing test in here, this wouldn't even kind of trigger to here. Vulnerability scan takes a bit because that's kind of using a separate Docker image to kind of run a dependency scanning tool. Okay, and I'm at this kind of hold for approval thing. I'm not going to hit approve just yet because I'm missing something for my Docker deploy, which I'll cover in very shortly. First, I want to talk about orbs. So I mentioned orbs in passing when I talked about our node orb. So orbs are our packages, shareable packages of CircleCI YAML. So, and each orb is essentially just more YAML, but it saves you time and effort, so you don't have to write it. So your kind of config files don't like stay super long. And yeah, an orb can have a set of commands, executors, and jobs. And yeah, you might have seen on CircleCI.com that we have kind of just announced the private orbs. So orbs used to be only public, so essentially available to anyone. Anyone could like use this orbs from any other organization, whereas now they're all actually private. So if you're like an enterprise that has kind of special or specific deployment needs, you can actually create your own orbs to use across the entire organization, for example, for all your kind of Kubernetes clusters or something like that. So yeah, each orb can have, yeah, as I said, a set of commands, executors, and jobs. So executors are our kind of runtime environments. For example, I did some Android work over the last couple of days, and we have a set of executors for a virtual machine image and also a Docker image. And you can easily just kind of pull them in from an orb. Commands are essentially a collection of steps, one or more steps that you can reuse across different jobs. And jobs are essentially kind of packaged versions of what I have here. For example, there is also a node test job that you can use that basically does the npm run test, all of that. Let me show you the developer portal. CircleCI.com/developer is our developer portal. We can see all the orbs, everything that's kind of in there. For example, I mentioned the node orb that we're using here. If I open it here, you can see all of its documentation, when it was published, and so on. And you can see that you've got like a bunch of jobs, a bunch of commands, a bunch of executors. And for each job, obviously, you can see that you can kind of see its actual source code. So you see that it's nothing other than more YAML that you save. And for example, the node job is super interesting because it will cache all the npm packages before and after, so kind of subsequent runs don't have to like install a bunch of stuff if you're dealing with quite a lot of npm dependencies. So these are orbs, and yeah, we maintain a bunch of them. For example, the top orbs, for example, like AWS, Azure, Google Clouds, Docker, Slack as well, we maintain. So they're kind of built and handled by CircleCI employees. But there is also a bunch of partner orbs. So from like security testing companies to testing companies, to deployment companies, all sorts of different partners have their own orbs with their own tooling, with their own kind of convenience configuration that you can utilize by just kind of going in the developer hub and searching for what's in there. So yeah, that's orbs. I also haven't touched on the resource classes. So with a very simple node project, it really doesn't matter what kind of machine it runs on. But for example, on an Android project, it very much does matter that you're running something on enough RAM and enough virtual CPUs for a Gradle build to actually pass the entire thing. So you can usually specify, or you can always specify this resource class that you want to run something on. And if you're seeing that something is like running very slowly, you can just see, okay, maybe more resources can make it faster, and it's very easy to try that out on a small example. So yeah, and obviously, if you have a very small example, you don't want to use a very large and more expensive resource to do something very simple. I touched on security already. So I mentioned that you don't want to kind of put any credentials in your GitHub repository or Git repository. That's why you can store any credentials that you need for your deployment, you need for anything. Code signing, for example, as well. You can store them inside of CircleCI. We have two types of environments available. One is regular or old environment variables that are based on a project. For example, this is one project, but you can also have something called a context, which is essentially a set of environment variables that are shared across different projects. So if you have an organization that can have like a production context for all of their kind of AWS deployment credentials, for example. Yeah, obviously everything is kind of secured, encrypted from source code, and as everything is kind of executed in its own kind of isolated container, nothing is kind of retained by us in terms of your source code. Yeah, obviously, and because we're just building the source code, we're not touching your data. We don't really kind of use. We can't really have access to any of your kind of production databases or anything like that. That's suffice to say. And we have a bunch of security certifications as well. Let's move on. Yeah, let's actually go back to my demo. I want to pass this, but I don't have my credentials yet in my Docker image. So let's set this up as well. For that, I'll go to this project settings. And you can see like there's environment variables that I talked about earlier. I will move this to a separate screen just because I don't want to leak my personal Docker keys. And yeah, my example for this example application just builds and deploys a Docker image, this app into a Docker image, and deploys that to Docker Hub. So I'll create this. I just need to see what it needs to be named. Docker login and Docker pwd. Okay. Okay. Password. And that should be it. Hello. Okay, so I've added my login and password for Docker. So now we can actually go back to our, we can actually go back to our application and hit approval. So this is something that you could have release manager do after they've kind of checked off all the steps they need to ensure that the app is compliant with whatever regulations your organization have. You could also have another job that basically slings in a message on Slack if they need to be informed of that. And obviously, now that I've kind of proved this, it's all going directly to Docker, to this deploy Docker job. I also want to show you how tests work. I'll show you one with broken tests, just because it's more interesting to see broken tests than it is to see not broken tests. I've done a lot of, okay. No, this one doesn't work. I'm trying to find a particular pipeline that I built last week that had a broken test. So I used a similar one at an intro to CI/CD. Okay, so for example, this has got the same source code, just a failing test. So you can immediately see a test that's kind of failed, and what's in there. And because we kind of stored the artifacts earlier, you can actually grab the entire kind of test results. And yeah, so like things like store artifacts, store test results, that could be like anything that your app actually needs to store. For example, I've stored like application binaries, or yeah, just kind of like results from various scans and tests, and you can access those for a while. One more thing you can do that's pretty cool is Insights. Insights is our kind of single pane of glass into your project, into your pipelines. For example, I've done quite a lot of testing on my Android apps for an upcoming blog post, and you can see like what's kind of been happening in my previous builds, how long they've been executing, and you can see that like for the last 90 days. So with these insights, you could actually see, okay, my builds have become very slow running. Why is this? Maybe this is worth investigating. You could see maybe, okay, there is a particular job that's like less successful than others. Like, why is this job never succeeding? Let's dig in and see, okay, maybe it's particularly flaky, maybe a particular test is badly written, and we need to kind of look into that. And obviously, you also see these things like mean time to recovery, which is pretty cool. And throughput. So throughput is how many times you run a particular pipeline per or a particular project. Create a pipeline per day. And mean time to recovery is how long it takes in our average to go from red to green build, essentially. Obviously, the samples are quite small for this, so this is going to be like a lot kind of more comprehensive on a real-ish project. And we're also kind of rolling out this kind of for the same statistics for tests. So you have like a bunch of tests that you're running. You want to see each test suite, how it's actually performing, and you'll be able to see that in those insights. All the kind of access permissions are based off what you have in set up in your organization on your VCS provider. So that's either GitHub or Bitbucket. So if you have like permissions for like write or admin permissions for different groups of users, you could actually see that. Obviously, this is my own personal organization, but for example, this is my something we did with a friend of mine, a project. So you could see that you can have multiple people kind of contributing to this. And yeah, this is all kind of coming from a single GitHub organization. Yeah, so I think we covered quite a lot. We covered the orbs, we covered the pipelines, we had covered the developer hub, what a config does. Yeah, so I think we're good with the demo. I can obviously show anything else. Let's move on to questions. I see that there has been a couple of them already. Okay, one was asked in the chat. Why YAML and not JSON, or support both? Right now, we are only supporting YAML. It tends to be the standard kind of this configuration language for infrastructure as code. I don't have a definitive reason for why it was chosen in the first place, but I've seen like Kubernetes is all kind of deployed with YAML. It's a universal, configuration language appears to be, and that's it. Yeah. Can you conditionally skip steps in a configuration? For example, we may compile a project and determine through a custom process that the binary is unchanged, so we might not want to test it to optimize our CI. Our testing is expensive due to the nature of the testing we do on our software, so skipping steps when we can detect binary equivalency is important for us. I believe we might have something for that. I think that something like that is either possible. I don't know how, because I've not done it, or might be soon to be possible. If you don't mind pinging me an email, zan@circleci.com, I will find that out for you, but I don't have an answer right here. I've seen something like that. I've seen something like that. I've seen those use cases before, so I will need to investigate. But yeah, please do email me, zan@circleci.com. And yeah. Okay. I'm just typing in my email if you want to. Yeah, that's that. Sorry, I can't definitively answer you, but I can definitely find this out offline. Is it possible to send signals out of CircleCI to a monitoring stack, something like Grafana or Elk, to show a CircleCI job ran and its outcome, so that we can tie deployments in with other application metrics already gathering to see increased error rates after a deploy? Yeah, I mean, you can. There's definitely. I've seen some orbs for. I've seen some orbs for maybe not Grafana, but I was talking to a friend who works at New Relic, and you can basically log like deployment events and stuff like that. There's orbs for that, but obviously that's just kind of like just a API call. And yeah, whenever something like that happen, you just create a tiny little job that will call that. The same with failed jobs, I suppose. And yeah, ultimately that's the easiest thing you could do. Yeah, there is obviously also the kind of, I mentioned the Slack orb, which kind of just does that, but not for a monitoring tool, but for like a team, so they kind of know what's happening. But yeah, you should be able to just kind of write, okay, when this has deployed, run a curl command that logs that with maybe a pipeline number or anything else really. When you change the build YAML, but don't make any code changes in the application, do you increase the application version? So depending on where your versions are coming from, it's often that you might have a version tied to, like a version code tied to a pipeline that's run. So if your version is actually tied to a pipeline, then let me show you this. We're going like 96. That would obviously be always going to increment it, even if you just change the config. What you could do is avoid that build. If you don't want to build it for some reason, you could avoid that with a skip-CI like message in your git commit message. But I don't think that's what you want to do in this case. But yeah, depending on how you're kind of incrementing your application versions, if you're relying on pipelines, then that would be automatically done. If you're not relying on pipelines, then you can make your application whatever version you want. I hope this answers your question. Is there any further questions? I think we had 3. Obviously, I only talked about the cloud-based tool. We also have CircleCI for server. So if you want to install CircleCI on your own infrastructure, you can do so. So yeah, we have like 2 different hosting options. One is from the cloud, one is on the server. And recently, we also released something called Runner, which is this kind of hybrid solution, which lets you use the cloud-based environment, but have builds or individual jobs execute in your own on your own infrastructure. So whether that's your custom hardware or infrastructure that's running behind some kind of on a protected network, you could do so with this tool called Runner. Yeah, they're called self-hosted runners. I've mentioned that. Yeah, I don't think there is any further questions. I will stay on for another 30 seconds. If you're typing something, please let me know. Otherwise, we can call it a day. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else happening. Anyway, thank you all very much for attending. It's been great presenting to you. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day or evening, wherever you are. And yeah, if you have any further questions, please do ping me at zan@circleci.com. Thank you. Bye.